Good morning. I'm Steve Wright. Welcome to the ICT Educator webinar series. I'm the statewide director of the ICT sector team with the California Community Colleges. On our website, you can visit and see our 10 regional directors who are throughout the state, and as well as many archives we have about different pathways, including computer science. Here's some, we do these webinars, done 27 of them now, and we record them, and they're kept on our website. They're video chapterized, transcripted along with the PowerPoint presentation. So it's an excellent resource to go back and look at all these different areas and relevant links. They're good for grant writing, for use in class, any way you'd like to. Coming up in the next couple of weeks, we're going to, next week, we're going to look at using for colleges to achieve their community college metrics results through market intelligence. We're going to take a look at what's out there in the marketplace and how you can use an ICT, that can help you drive program selection, development, and promotion. Then we're going to be looking at digital media and some of the trends, how upskillers can stay relevant and fresh, and courses and things they might want to take for that. And then we'll be looking at our virtual labs capability, educational technology for use in IT. Very exciting. This week, we're going to focus on computer science best practices. Allison is with us. She's done a study previously where she looked at software development in the Bay Area and tried to tackle the myth, can you just take a coding class and get a job in a big tech company? And among many things she found out, which is in a report she wrote at that time, is that, it's still pretty nice if you got a computer science degree. And since we have such a developed pathway, a transfer model curriculum, whatever, between community colleges and the CSUs, we decided to go ahead and take a look at who's doing that well and who can do it even better. So Allison has taken some time. First we went to West Ed, and we got them to give us the data on who's transferring from different types of schools, and we got a representative sample of some of the more heroic undertakings. And then Allison went ahead and talked to everybody there, and she's going to share that with you today. So I don't want to take any more time from her and what she's going to tell us. So I'll turn it over to you.
So this webinar is all about how to get higher transfer rates in your computer science pathways. And what does that really mean? Well, in the context of this project, it means you'll hear about best practices at other community colleges that we've identified as transfer champions. So it's this, but the presentation's it's not a checklist. It's not a list of things to do, because there's tons of research. A lot of people are looking at computer science from all education, from all directions, all age ranges. This is really gets at the question of what are we already doing right in the community colleges. And I'll go into some specific examples so that it's something that you might take inspiration from or get an idea from. Maybe it'll spur some collaboration. Basically, we want to spread these best practices around. So who created this project? Steve Wright, our beloved ICT DM statewide director, conceived of it. Karen Beltramo, who I also worked with on the previous project, was a great resource for staying on top of really understanding the data as it came to me. And then I conducted the interviews, and I relied on, I have my own electrical engineering and computer science degree. It's from a while ago. I'm not going to say how long ago, but I do have some experience going in and out of tech, and I've even taken a few, I actually took data structures and algorithms at my local community college a few years ago, because I just wanted to get up to date. So let's see, the real star contributors of this report are the CS faculty and department chairs that shared their time and insights for these interviews, despite their already really full schedules. They're already participating in transfer model curriculum, actually teaching, helping students with the content, helping students get out of their logistical jams, and then all of the other administrative activities, as well as professional collaboration. So there's a lot going on, and it was a little tricky to track down some of you people. So that's the background about who's involved. And I have good news. So how are the colleges doing already in terms of our transfers? So this is really focused on the transfers. We have, the community colleges have grown the transfers significantly over the last 5 years, much faster than overall growth in transfers for the same time period. So this little graph on the left shows that for, covers a period of 5 years. At the beginning of this period of 5 years, we had fewer than 2,000 transfers into four-year bachelor's programs. And this number only represents transfers into CSU and UC. So it doesn't actually represent, we didn't capture transfers into private universities. So I just want to point that out. And now we're over 4,000 in the most recent year we have data for. So good job, everybody. And that represents everyone. That's not just the colleges that we targeted for these to find out more about these best practices. All right, so so that's the good news. There's a lot of inquiry around who is actually in these classes. Do we have a nice, diverse, gender balanced group of students like this picture? Not exactly, but there are some bright spots to report on. And I pulled this info from there's a CSU database on transfers, and I have a little more detail on that at the very end of the presentation if anybody wants to really dig into the data. But once you get oriented to this chart, it basically shows 10 years with the categories that were visible, like that would show up on this scale. There are a couple other categories in their relative proportion. So they're actually the absolute student numbers, but you can kind of look at them relatively. So in 2008, you can see this dark red column is the Hispanic population. The blue column next to it is Asian transfers, and then the light pink column on the far right is white students transferring. And so if you follow that over time, you can see when a decade later at the far right, Hispanic students are about equal with Asian students. And what that means numbers wise is that they represent 26% of total transfers, up from only 16% 10 years ago. So that's solid progress. So we should celebrate that. And just for one more reference point, there are a lot of ways to look at these numbers. This is not the only way to look at them, but Hispanic population in California is something like 39%. So still not representative of the overall population, but moving in the right direction. Now, how about women? This is near and dear to my heart. I definitely remember being the only woman in some of my classes. This picture is a little more complex. So this is from the same data set, so it only represents transfers into California state universities. And the blue line shows total transfers, that same number we already looked at, but just for CSU on the y-axis. And then the red line is a scaled version of female transfers. So you can see there's we're tracking, and there's a little split between the lines as you go farther off to the right in time. But to really understand what's going on, it's just subject to interpretation. But if you look at the chart, the grid at the bottom of this slide, you can see there's a percentage listed for female out of the total transfers. And so one way to look at it, if you just look at the last 5 years, you can see that, well, we've grown from 12% 5 years ago, roughly 12%, up to almost 15%. And that's a small amount of growth, but it's growth. However, if you go back 10 years, you can see that we were at 15% 10 years ago. So, there's work to be done here. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. And I wanted to also just acknowledge that I've seen other presentations with a 30% women in computer science kicking around. And that just, you know, I have yet to actually see the data on that. That may be true, but for the numbers I was looking at, we're really only at 15%. So putting that out there. Moving right along to our project. How did we identify the transfer champions? Because as you can see from the data, the colleges are really succeeding as a whole. And I looked across there, when you look at the transfer numbers, there are transfers coming from just about every college. So that is impressive. Students are finding a way through to get to their four-year programs, to get to their CSU, UC, and private universities through the community colleges, whether or not there's an identified computer science associate's degree or other milestone on the way, they're doing it. And that's collectively. So with this data from West Ed, Steve kind of honed in, because this is he knows the whole system and how things interrelate. So we honed in. It was really easy to figure out who had greater than 20% transfer rates. We also looked at who was passing through greater than 50 students a year. And the last year we used the data for was 2017/2018. And then the other criteria, which was a little trickier to identify, and that's where West Ed really came in, was figuring out which colleges were really serving underrepresented minorities well. So we started with those three criteria. That represents a lot of the colleges. So if your college is not on here, don't stress out. We also used a secondary criteria, which is location, so that we could get representation across the whole state and not just concentrate on tech hubs where we're in the heart of Silicon Valley, really expand a little bit, going further north, going into the Empire. And then the last criteria, which actually kind of makes or breaks the whole thing, is willingness to be interviewed, because CS department chairs and faculty are really have full plates. So I talked to one professor who said he was teaching 7 classes and he's available in April for an interview. So needless to say, that college's input didn't make it into this presentation, but like I said, I felt like I connected with a variety of types of schools, and I'll actually flip to the next page to show you that. So our transfer champions, so these are on the left, you can see the colleges we identified as excelling in CS transfers, and we reached out to all of them. And then the ones you can see on the right, the little red pointers, those are the schools we actually connected with. And like I said, variety of locations, variety of college sizes, variety of models. So what we found is different things worked for different departments. And the colleges really exist in a constellation of other colleges. So anyway, moving on to I'd like to get into the success philosophies because I have tons to present, but I want to also leave time for a little conversation with all the participants and questions, because I know some of you attending actually have a lot of experience and expertise to share, particularly in some of these programs that the bottom quote on here, the success philosophy of outreach and remove administrative obstacles, creating these partnerships between the community colleges and a nearby CSU. It's quite exciting, both in terms of creating a cohort and increasing how well we're serving underrepresented minorities. So go back to the first success philosophy. So what I found is there wasn't a one-size-fits-all answer. There was not, when I talked to people, I really did a lot of listening. I asked a series of questions about faculty, curriculum, scheduling, requirements, tutoring, industry presentations, outreach, all these questions, but I also asked department chairs and the faculty that I spoke with, what do you think has contributed to your success? So there was all this information coming in. I just listened, and what came through is it's really not one size fits all, but a few philosophies kind of bubbled to the top. So I'll share some of those. This first one, happy faculty, happy students, seems, you know, a little simple, but it's really not, because it acknowledges that that educators don't exist in a vacuum, and that it's a real thing for an adjunct to get burnt out, or a faculty member to, you know, lose, you know, just to be overwhelmed. So De Anza is actually our largest transfer school. There are 249 transfers in the last year of our data, out of a department that's has FTEs over 1,000. So really a large department. And so there are, I think, 9 full-time faculty or 8 full-time faculty there, and something like 38 adjuncts. So keeping the faculty engaged and creating a community really made a difference to that department. So happy faculty, happy students. The next quote I want to share is success philosophy. Caleb Fowler, who's on this call and is at Folsom Lake, which is a smaller department, really chose to focus. So they took stock of where they existed in the constellation of in their district, and actually ended up eliminating some courses to elevate a focus on their core programming classes. And that's how they achieved their results. So things that really students couldn't complete a whole sequence because it wasn't being offered enough, they just said, well, SQL's offered somewhere else, we're going to let go of that class. And so that was pretty bold and rewarding. Let's see, the third, and some of these I'll actually go into more detail on De Anza and Folsom Lake. I want to comment on Evergreen, which is actually has a really high percentage of transfer rates, something like over 40% of the FTEs transfer. And just to reiterate, this percent of transfers, the ideal is not 100%, because students come into these CS departments, the CIS departments, with different objectives. So a student coming in that does not have an objective of transferring, you can't force them into transferring. So the metric, it's not, we're not trying to get to 100% with transfers, but we're trying to get at how is it to get more to meet the needs of more transfer students and successfully get them through the system, because we still have a demand in the state for more jobs for employees with full CS bachelor's credentials or higher. Right, so when I talked, so Evergreen, getting back to Evergreen, Henry Estrada, I spoke with him, and he just took kind of a classic approach, a philosophy to how to draw students in, is hire the best people, just, you know, teach the best material, and just be excellent and they will come. So just to kind of distinguish the school and build the school's reputation. And you know, again, they exist within a constellation, and that's true. There's a higher percentage transfer rate at Evergreen. Let's see, the next success philosophy I like to share came from Mark Lair at Riverside. And it was really about creating environments where students could actually put their skills to the test, kind of sparking that excitement in creating and coding. So they've been hosting the ICPC, I hope I'm getting the letters for that right, competition for 20 years. They travel to competitions, and what that does for them is it provides throws the community colleges in an environment where four-year schools are coming to the coding competitions. And they're seeing where they will be, and it starts to feel accessible. And really, there's nothing like coding in a team, being part of a team, it's different than solo work. So I think this starts to get at some of the common threads, which is our next slide, that building community and collaboration came through at every college I spoke with as critical. And I already mentioned this last point on the slide about, but it's worth going into more detail, this outreach and remove administrative obstacles. For the CS in 3 program, so for Hartnell and CSUMB, there are 2 things going on here. So about half of the Hartnell students are in the CS in 3 program. So there's an outreach program. Students are identified, invited to participate, provided funding, and they're in a 3-year program. So they're taking classes in the summers. And at the end of the 3 years, there's 1 summer they're available for internships. But it's this super intense progression, but there's this emphasis on building a cohort. And also they're able to focus on the serious, intense learning that happens because they're not distracted by administrative obstacles. They're automatically registered for their classes. They rather than helping them solve administrative obstacles, the administrative obstacles are obliterated and removed from the whole playing field, which is pretty powerful to think about. So no discussion of these success philosophies can really happen without mentioning that approach. And I did speak with Satya quite a bit. He's at Hartnell and CSUMB and is really a great resource and is in fact sharing these practices. Let's move on to common threads. So one thing that I did hear across different colleges was they were having better success with in-person programs than online. Now, all the colleges were offering both. I'm not sort of 100%, but predominantly there are options, evening options, daytime options. They'd found a way to offer, provide enough seats for the critical classes. But in terms of success, people staying in the courses in person really made a difference. So is that because we haven't dialed in exactly how to successfully do online learning? Well, that was a topic of a previous webinar hosted by the ICT-DM seminar series with Lance Ford, and I attended that, and that was pretty interesting. But getting off track here, what actually has been working is in person or a combination. So I heard some stories about students taking the first class online and then surviving it, but coming on to switching to an on-campus class for the next programming class in the sequence. Another common thread that turned up was endless variations of TA programs with either peer-led TAs or and some paid, some volunteer, some happening inside the classroom, and some, sometimes there was a STEM mentor, but there was this real emphasis on creating tutoring, making sure tutoring opportunities were really truly available for the students. Collaboration, as I mentioned, already came up. That builds good programmers and also helps students work through their challenges and not feel so isolated. So there were quite a few schools that had collaboration built into the classroom. So students wouldn't necessarily even need to participate. Now, many schools also had coding clubs or industry speakers, but you didn't even have to, at these schools, you didn't have to even go beyond your core coursework, which is pretty intense, to find some of that collaboration and make the connections that are supportive, when you need them, when the code isn't going well. Finally, there was definitely an attention to scheduling, and that looked different for different departments, simply because the size of the department mattered, but anything from keeping the math and CS courses tied, offered at the same time on the same, or back to back in an evening. That was something LA Harbor did. And just making sure there, again, like I said, enough spaces available so that people can progress through the required courses without getting stymied by a course not being available. Now that still sometimes happens, and that's where the community, the network of colleges can kind of fill the gaps. A student could take, say, a required math course at another campus, but that's really not optimal. So attention to scheduling was a big factor. A few inclusivity threads also came up, and those included visibly placed, diverse instructors. And I like this quote. One of the very first things, within like 2 minutes of getting on the phone with Caleb Fowler at Folsom Lake, he said, the hardest thing to wrap the people need to understand is we're not trying to weed people out, but meet them where they are. And I definitely know firsthand what the weeder class experience is like. They're trying to make you suffer so you give up. But what happens, grit is valuable. Like, we want students, programmers, software developers, really everybody needs to have some grit to get through life, to be tenacious. But there's a difference between challenging people and not supporting people. So we want to challenge people where they are and also offer support. So it's a balance. Other inclusivity threads, I already mentioned providing programming competitions, creating opportunities to mix with other universities so students start to see where they're going along the path, in either just to the next, to their CSU or UC, that's their next step, or this last point, incentivized enrichment events, basically meaning if you're going to go to the trouble, if many of these colleges had either women in computing speakers or industry speakers, or at Hartnell it was called ABC, which somebody probably knows what that stands for. It's eluding me. Everything about, anyway, it was beyond computing. So seeing the bigger picture of where computer science fits in the world, in industry. But to get the people that are super into it will go to these talks. The students that are into it will go to these talks anyway. So we need to schedule them wisely, as well as offer things like extra credit, and really the oldest trick in the book, feed people. Feed people so that they show up at events that are good with them, that are good for them. I also included this, it seemed wrong to just have a white guy on the picture of our inclusivity page, so I just wanted to show that we're at Folsom Lake, there is some diversity, so 2 full-time staff, full-time faculty here, and Dr. Al Jabouri is the other full-time professor. So a little male-female balance happening there, and that sends a powerful message to students. So let's dig in a little more to De Anza. As I said, this is the most, De Anza does the most transfers of any college in the system. 9 full-time faculty, 38 adjuncts. There's a little picture of De Anza. I don't think that's the engineering building, but it's actually at De Anza. And let's see, I spoke with Mary Pape, and she talked about, and she's been there a while, her top 3 reasons, success strategies, were meeting students where they are. So this is number 1 reason, number 1 success strategy, meeting students where they are. And going hand in hand with that, starting a peer tutor program in the classroom. So the previous TA program went away, they created a new one, And this happened early on in the programming cycle, the class cycle. So she explained to me as an important part of this was giving the students that are the peer tutors the right philosophy to understand that they're really there to help and support. So kind of just propagating this, meeting students where they are to the whole community, not just coming from the faculty. Some of the tutors did end up becoming paid TAs, and they made an effort to show really well published, really make the TAs and tutors accessible. And this photo I've included on the right side of the slide, I pulled that. All I did was Google De Anza Computer Science. It went straight to the computer science page, and a single click away is the teaching assistant schedule, right? On that page. So it's really accessible. And De Anza really does a nice job of that. Like if I go through the faculty directory and I click on a professor, I can see the professors. Well, I can definitely see Mary's schedule and when she's available, when her office hour is. There's an updated schedule of office hours for the entire faculty. So that doesn't happen by accident. Getting all that organized, that was a real clear priority. The third reason she shared with me behind their success was that they didn't jump right into online. They worked on creating a community in their lab with multiple coordinators, and they really made sure to make the path clearer to students. So to help them avoid taking the wrong classes, understanding how to get the right support at the right time. So making the path clear. So it's all about pathways. Well, like, let's just get the junk out of the pathway. Let's provide support to keep the path clear. So that's something. And you know, I actually met a few De Anza students just on Thursday night that had transferred to UCSC. So I want to share a little De Anza story. And they were all excited about participating in this hackathon. But I asked them if they participated in coding clubs when they were so it's actually a team of 4, 2 from De Anza, 1 from City College, 1 from Las Positas. And they all ended up at UC Santa Cruz because I'm in Santa Cruz. So that's where I met them, in the vicinity. I said, did you participate in coding competitions when you were in community college? And they said, no, we were too busy trying to survive the coursework. And they said they felt a sense of community because they ended up in class with all the same people because they were taking their math and their computer science. So for the students that are going through in a 2-year schedule that know they're going into computer science, I think the savvy students coming in with an idea of what they're expecting are able to find their way to a cohort. In fact, so much so that they said that they missed the small classes at community college. So this is coming from the largest transfer school. They still felt that sense of support. So I thought that's pretty cool. All right, let's move on to a smaller department focus, Folsom Lake. She already talked about a little bit. They were included because they had a 20% transfer rate with 42 transfers in the last year we looked up, which was up from 10 5 years before that. So pretty significant growth. Most of their students are full-time students, traditional age group, working part-time. And I should mention, I would say for most of the schools I spoke with, except for a few exceptions, the students were in the traditional age group. But also working part-time definitely is a reality. So Folsom Lake had quite a few varied approaches for success that some of I've touched on. So approaches for content, honing in and eliminating classes, which is definitely scary. Eliminating classes is scary. So there was an intentional embrace of risk taking, and they applied that when exploring new course offerings as well. So trying different material to bring excitement to students, and also excitement to faculty. Not all of them stuck, but they ended up with a software testing course. And then again, coming back to the scheduling point, the Course ES courses were offered every semester in multiple formats so that there's no barrier to proceeding through the program, whether you're with a cohort or passing through at a different rate. Now, Caleb talked to me about attending California Community College Association for Occupational Education conference in the spring as just a great way, and I think that's actually next week, as a great way to stay connected and just receive the flow of ideas, and that interest in just furthering, always taking the skills to the next level, innovating. I think even though schools did it differently, I continuously heard efforts at trying new things, measuring the success of the new things they were trying, whether it's attending this college or this conference or otherwise. So in terms of approach for teaching methods, the AQ facilitation has really changed the way the classroom looks, and it's turned what were traditionally lecture-based classes into these interactive project-based class environments that have a lot less lecture time. So like you might have a example code and then students have to figure out what's the output, or a pointer problem, and then you need to add a feature. And what's interesting about the mandatory partner switches, people groan about being forced to switch partners, but it's really an amazing tool because it means everyone's included. So it is definitely possible to attend a course, particularly if you're not exactly aligned with the main cohort, and in the traditional lecture format, not actually talk to anybody. So just making sure their partner switches really just force this community to happen. You can't force people to be friends, but it really created this intentionalness to the community. And then I already mentioned the outreach approach with intentionally trying to create diverse faculty. And then that led to a summer outreach program for women, and in particular, they have a program coming up for refugee women. So I haven't talked too much about outreach. That has really varied among the transfer champions, how much outreach is happening. So it's not, at the moment, not correlated across the board with the transfer numbers. So I think that means there's huge opportunity for more outreach. And I just wanted to share that one particular example. So that was a small department focus. Now we have a teeny tiny department focus. LA Harbor does really well serving underrepresented minorities, but it is tiny. There is not even a single full-time faculty at LA Harbor. So the whole department exists within a math and CS department. There are 3 adjuncts. 2 of them work in industry nearby. 1 also works for another community college. I spoke with the chair, Farah Sadi, and she had, so their numbers, they transferred, despite having 0 full-time faculty, they transferred 24 students the last year we looked at, which was up from 6 transfers 5 years before that. And they got included for CS Transfer Champions, both for their percentage of transfers and their, like I said, their success serving underrepresented minorities. So how is this even possible to send so many people through to transfer? Well, on the surface, it looks crazy, but really the CS students were folded into they're very supported by the math community. And so Farah cited the strong, diverse math department that's 50% female as a place that really supported the students, and they have embedded math tutors. They also coordinated the scheduling of their math and computer science courses. And they also used a federal grant to get a STEM mentor to kind of fill that gap for the CS students, you know, where there isn't full-time faculty, just to make sure they have enough support. So somewhere that small, a TA program with peer-led tutoring might work, but it might be tricky. So they've found other ways to support their students. And they're really, you know, there were talks about the department potlucks, about the openness and camaraderie between the students and the faculty, both before and after class. So I think this one advantage of being a small department is you really can't get lost in a small department, or hopefully when done well, students are, it's just almost like a family. All right, so that concludes the focus on the departments. I'd like to share a few unexpected findings. And well, I already mentioned that best practices do look different and are impacted by the constellation of community colleges nearby. So if you know your neighboring school is specializing in game design, don't duplicate that. You know, so people just be aware of that we exist in this larger community of schools and of CS departments, and just taking that time to intentionally create the department's focus beyond the core curriculum. So regarding the core curriculum or the transfer model curriculum, the bulk of these classes, it turns out language, we thought when we asked these questions, we might find that there was really one particular programming language drove the success. That was not true, although there were some strong opinions in favor of C++. But there's quite a lot of variety, and I think the exposure to multiple languages was also cited as valuable. The transfer model curriculum isn't yet driving the transfers. Like, not all of these schools had transfer model curriculums, and students are finding their way through. So it was generally a positive vibe about the transfer model curriculum, but it wasn't cited as a driving factor for transfers yet. And then this last point, some places it's pretty helpful to have a high-level sponsor, particularly these partnerships between the community college and the local CSU when there's something like a CS in 3 happening. But not many of the successful programs didn't cite a high-level sponsor. Some cited a well-trained guidance counselor. Many students and faculty just said, oh, just go to assist.org. So that's a tool people are really using. Let's see, so the real student obstacles come when there's the late night soul searching and self-doubt. I guess that guy, yeah, you can see the computer off the side of this picture. And so there's just some of that is going to happen no matter how much support you have, and no matter how many teams you're participating in. So it's important to feel like you belong in your community, in your department when that happens, because that's just a real part of making your way through a computer science degree. So if I were to wrap this up with some top 4 practices, I would be remiss if I did not list schedule first, because you really want to optimize it so students can get through, and then it takes into account their actual schedules. And doesn't leave behind people that are going through at a different rate. So that comes to this second point of really requiring or strongly inviting, creating opportunities for student collaboration and interaction in every core class. So that could be happening in that, not just at the beginning classes, but along the way, because if somebody's on a different schedule, they need to be pulled into the fold, pulled back into the community. If somehow they got out of sync in their cohort, and that class time, whether it's in person or online. So that's finding a way to make that happen is really important. And I talked a lot about meeting students where they are. With when I spoke with faculty, I really got the sense of genuine connection and care for the students. Mary Pape at De Anza actually said that the full-time faculty, it's their job to nurture and support the students. So how can you do that? How can you continually be giving? Well, this fourth point, staying connected and fueled professionally, that's the wind in your sails for whatever it is that you're doing to distinguish your program, whether it's moving into outreach, adding some innovative programming, a new class, or whatever it is that students ask you to say yes to. And that's going back to the very first interview I had. When I spoke with Mark Lair at Riverside, he said, some of this is just saying yes when students ask. So you want to be able to say yes. That's how they ended up hosting the ICPC coding competition for the last 20 years. All right, I have a couple more slides just with a little further reading. If you want to dig deeper, you could do a screen grab of this. If you want to get a little more info on equity, which is another better way of approaching diversity, inclusion, underrepresented minorities. Some of that, I think, all this, stepping back a minute to the bigger context, a lot of that's happening in the K through 12 arena, where we're bringing CS to the fore. And I just like the CS for CA website. If you go to their equity guide, section 2.5, you can start to see some of the language that starts to include people earlier on in the pipeline, really focusing on problem solving, creativity, and communication, creating a broad understanding of how CS impacts people in society. And the other guide at CS for CA that's kind of nice is CS for what? Diverse, like really getting into what are some of the values underneath the drive for equity, and pulling them apart and just getting into that. The other reference on this page actually stumbled across at my son's school. They got an award for female diversity in their AP computer science classes. So you can read about how they did that over a period of 2 years. They grew participation from 20% to over 50%. And they basically did it by just changing some of the language, creating more inclusive language around the program, like and putting it in the context of industry in the area wanting collaborators or creative communicators, and this point where CS and the things created by CS actually interface with the world made a real difference. And I want to just read you a quote. So STEAM, not STEM. So science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. Not just, don't forget the A. The A makes a difference. In fact, that really gives context and meaning. So offer a quote that came from a longitudinal analysis of community college, it's not on the slide, community college pathways to computer science bachelor's degrees. And this says, in particular, computing assignments should be relevant to students' personal interests, communities of origin, and career goals, and should show how CS can be useful to society. One large-scale study found that these meaningful assignments were the single most important predictor of students' commitment to a computing major, and this predictor was particularly strong among women and underrepresented minorities. So I think we all can resonate with that. When you have meaningful work, it's easier to really stick with, make it through the hard parts. So I want to just offer that, looking forward. And then if you'd like to dig a little deeper into the data, I've included the various sites we used for transfer, the top ones for CSU transfer, and the majors we included. The second ones, how to pull the UC transfer data, and the majors we included there, because of course they're different. And then if you're feeling really brave, you can go to the Datamart site and start digging into the top codes. And that's all I have. We can maybe take a few questions or some discussion.
Yeah, you can, we'll take a look at the chat box as well. But Allison, right off the bat, I just want to thank you for what I didn't realize was going to be an inspirational talk. It does remind me that perhaps quality teaching and education is still our, the most important product or capability we have in the community college system. And I want to thank you for really getting down and taking a personal approach, talking to the faculty and getting, in my job, I just get so busy and so bureaucratic that I sometimes forget about what it's all about. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to do it. And I hope we have some questions here. You can feel free to speak up, and I can take a look at some of the chats here and try to can you see the chat line?
Yeah, I'm just digging into the chat.
You might want to skim that, or if someone wants to speak up with the question. And I think I recognize Caleb now, and from his picture. Hi, Caleb. Very insightful, good stuff. Thank you. All right, floor is open.
All right, so we've got, so if you look in the chat, we've got another info on women in computing, which is great to see. And then a question, do they look at hybrid courses at all, where they meet half the time in the classroom and a bit more on their own online? And the answer, I'm glad you asked that. Yes, those were actually a sweet spot, especially as departments have to continue to grow, because the demand is still growing and buildings aren't just materializing from space. So basically, even though in person gets these great results, a hybrid class is a form of an in-person class, and we will be forging forward with hybrid classes, whether we decide that's best or not, simply because of space. So yeah, let's see what else. What are your thoughts on computer science degrees versus DevOps and DevSecOps, and including secure curriculum? Let's see, this is getting probably slightly more technical than I am capable of answering well, but perhaps someone else wants to comment about programming languages in certificate programs. Let's see. And I would say the focus of this talk is really the transfers. So we could go into that, but I'd rather focus on.
Well, I think in your prior study, the one on software development pathways, you undertook going to the coding academies throughout San Francisco. You talked to a number of high-tech firms, and you basically concluded that, yeah, there's a lot of way you can learn coding as an adult, and kind of coming back and regrooming yourself. And you even listed the courses at community colleges that might be appropriate for that, even though they're more targeted toward entry level. But the thing that I remember from that early study is that, gee, if you just have a computer science degree, wouldn't that be great? Because it's just, everybody's still saying that's like a floor, a basic starting point. And there are lots of other ways to get there too. You could already have a finance degree and catch up on some coding and get into the workforce doing that. But I mean, golly, if it's already there and the community colleges are offering it, and it's a accessible pathway, that's pretty good. So it's not really an answer to that question, but it depends on who the audience is. Is it, you were talking about first-time students out of high school, or relatively traditional age? I like the way you use that euphemism for our students, because a lot of them get out of high school, spend a couple of years going, wait a second, what happened? And then they come in, so they're in their 20s. But so some people, these things are midlife. About half of our students are this kind of midlife upskiller, and about half of our students are starting off. And depending on the department, you might see more or less of other ones. I'm not sure that answers that question at all, but for getting a computer science degree, these pathways are pretty good. Anybody have another comment on that question?
I do have a comment on the online versus in person, in that Lance Ford's talk before. He really, that was last month, he was talking about distance learning, which who knows, with what's going on out there in the world, we might all be doing more distance learning as perhaps schools are closed temporarily. Anyway,
we've all refrained from shaking hands today.
Right, we can just, fist bump. Okay. That just being willing to put yourself out there on video and make the connection, which I will admit is, I mean, I'm a nerd's nerd. Like, my inclination is not to use the video on for this conversation. And I just thought, well, that's the way we're going. Just have to find a way to be comfortable with it. So that might be something other people are, struggling with too. So it's evolving. And I'm sure there'll be more interesting seminars from the ICT DM Friday presentations on that topic eventually.
Yeah, we keep working on it. I think in this particular, the ICT Educator Series is also an example of, what if we all got together every Friday at 10 a.m. and had a mini conference thing. And we've been doing 27 of these now, so we're getting pretty comfortable with it. And like, I've told people before that for me, it's a matter of lighting and buying a nice $45 backdrop from Amazon, and people think I'm a pretty professional outfit here. But in reality, I have a very messy office on the other side of the screen. But we have to learn how to be in this world. And I think when it comes to distance ed, what Lance was talking about in that presentation is how to use all the tools, the texting after hours, the 24/7 accessibility, to help create more of a community around what is essentially a pretty artificial space. And so I think what he was trying to do is say, when you do have the rural distances and it's impossible to really be face-to-face, what's the best you can do? So those of you who want to go back and see that episode, that was Lance. What's Lance's last name?
Ford.
Lance Ford on distance education. And it kind of helps with some of those things. But I just love what you did here, because the question is, what are we doing in our community colleges that seems to be working? And thank you for finding that out.
We have time for a couple of, one more question that's come up a couple times in the chat is the average class size at De Anza. Do you happen to know that off the top of your head, Allison?
I do not know. I did check the current quarter. There are 5 versions of the data structures class. And when I took that same class at Cabrillo, it maxed out at 50 people. So I was estimating that. Does anybody else have a sense of how large those are? I mean, because we can find out too, but does anybody here know that? Okay. I did see there's one other question about recommendations when for colleges where the math or other departments don't align with transfer colleges for the units. And that is definitely a real challenge. And I don't have a simple answer, because there are so many pathways through that. Following checklists and charts, like, students can get in this mode of death by checklist. And and as I was looking through, because there's another part of this report that's a recommendations for students and their parents about to embark on a trip through community college, transferring to a 4-year program. And basically I said, go to that CSU data site and figure out if anybody, like, once you determine your destination college, look up the transfer numbers and see if anyone has ever transferred from the community college near you. So kind of reverse engineer it. And now this isn't going to help the professors, but this is just the state of where we are. There are complex, frustrating disconnects between some of the math science course scheduling, and this is a real challenge. So that's what I can say on that topic.
Right, good. Well, our time's about up, and so we're going to wrap it up now. I want to thank you once again, Allison, for the exceptional work and the way you shared it today. It was very genuine, and I think we all picked up on that. The next week we're going to take a week off because of the CCC AOE, and then the following week we'll be back with looking at market data on different kinds of sector growth and how that translates into achievable metrics at colleges by emphasizing one course or another, which is, well, I guess that's where the money's at these days. Anyhow, but thank you all very much. It's been an enjoyable Friday with you. Take care.
Thanks.